Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So 1 p.m. Thank you for joining us for this continuing education webinar on how to run a condo election using electronic voting. My name is Frank Valdez. I'll be your moderator and your host here, hopefully for the next hour. We are still getting folks logging in. I want to thank everybody already in the call. I'm just going to give another minute or so here for some of the folks trying to log in. Going to give them a little bit more time to log in, and we will get started here in just seconds. We're seconds away. So, as the logins continue here, as folks join us on the call. I want to thank you again for giving us some time today, giving us an opportunity to connect with you, discuss a little bit about electronic voting. I think today mostly centered on condominiums. I do want to bring everybody's awareness up and letting you know the meeting is being recorded. So don't worry, we can share the recording with everyone. The presentation as well can be shared. There is a Q&A feature. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature that we have. The Q&A feature is invaluable as it lets us answer questions and keep things organized. So again, try not to use the chat feature for questions, but use instead the Q&A feature for questions. All right, so Q&A for questions. I promise you we will try to get to as many of those as, if not all of them, if possible, in today's conversation. And so again, as we have some folks logging in here, thank you for joining us. We'll get started here momentarily, and we're recording the meeting. So hopefully we'll get plenty of questions in the Q&A chat answered, and we'll be able to share this for you. I'll get the presentation here up and running and share my screen. Hopefully everyone sees that. Oh, just a moment. All right, we should be good to go on that one. Let's see what we've got. All right. Hello from Jacksonville, the Plaza. Awesome. Representing Jacksonville, South Georgia there almost. But hello, Jacksonville. Good to have you here, and thank you for joining us. And again, we've got that Q&A chat up and running. So please feel free to add any questions there. We will try to keep our eyes on it as much as possible. What we'll do is we'll probably get through some material, then hit some Q&A, get through some more material, hit some Q&A, just to kind of break things up a little bit for the most part. So again, thanks for joining us. We're going to get started here. I think we've got most of the participants, if not all, here. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. My name's Frank Valdez. I'll get through the introduction now. But if you are logging in for the How to Run a Condo Election using electronic voting, a 1 hour accredited session for our license cams, as of today, course number 9633918, provider number 9324, you're in the right place. This is fresh off the printer here. We just got approval for this course, so this is our first official one that we are running. No doubt it will get even better after today. So let's dive right in. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Frank Valdez. I'm your moderator for today's course. A little bit about my background: state license clearly to be with you here today by the DBPR. As far as this role, I've been at it for 5 years. Prior to this, worked in the property management industry. So hoping to be your subject matter expert today as it pertains to electronic voting. I've worked in several capacities in my own community, violations, architectural, you name it. And so again, got a ton of experience out there. I'm going to walk through the agenda now. And again, for those folks that just kind of joined in, thank you. We've got a Q&A chat, so make sure you put any questions in there. And we're going to dive right into the presentation here. We're going to go through the quick intro, the Florida statutes. So for those on the call today that may not be so familiar with some of the statutory requirements governing the e-voting and what we are trying to accomplish, I'm going to make sure I create kind of some structural integrity here behind what we're doing, and that we cover some of the House Bill 913 updates, e-voting statutes, and that we have a base for what we're trying to accomplish here. We'll walk through the election process, notice requirements, hybrid meetings, and e-voting. Some of the challenges, remember, as with everything that is changed, there's always some challenges to consider. And we're going to walk through some best practices and again, try to leave plenty and ample room for Q&A. So again, thank you for joining us. Let's dive right in. A little bit about the company I represent today here. Work for Get Quorum. Get Quorum was founded in 2016. We've been providing electronic voting in the state of Florida now for 10 years. It is a full white glove service of e-voting, e-notices, helping save a ton on printing and postage, hosted virtual meetings and surveys as well. We've got north of 30 industry experts that are now working with us and over 3,000 associations from 17 door communities here in Florida to over 9,000 door communities, if you can believe that. Clearly, that's an HOA, not a condo, but quite large communities out there as well. We've got some integrations we've finalized, whether it's with Vanica, Front Steps, Zoom, VMS, Livy, or Concierge Plus. But we've gotten through a ton of integrations just to make life simpler. All right, let's dive right in here and let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's conversation. Let's get into e-voting statutes and House Bill 913 updates. Again, I promised you a base for what we're going to discuss today. And there are some folks on the call that this might be redundant for. And as I see some folks still joining us, again, thank you for being on the call today. We're going to provide a little bit of a base here for the statutes, for what they require. For those on the call today, if you already know some of these statutes in the base, bear with us. I just want to make sure that we all understand kind of what comes prior to some of the e-voting in the communities. All right, and again, that Q&A chat is live. Make sure that you've provided your license CAM number already to us in that registration. If you've not, Mark will provide some updates in the chat there as to how you can get that to us. Let's dive in here. Again, I promise you a good base here to position what the e-voting statutes say, and that's important. So for the condos joining us today, and I assume that most of the folks on the call will be from the condominium space, especially because today's talk is going to be more so focused on condos. We've got the e-voting statute of 718.128. All right. It's a famous e-voting statute there for electronic voting. If you just do a simple Google search, it's going to walk you through some of the items that I'm going to mention here today. It's going to let you know, just as the call I was just on prior to this one, that e-voting has to first come by way of a resolution being passed by a board vote only. So again, first things first, let's make sure we're on the same page here. The board is responsible for passing a resolution, board vote only, allowing electronic voting to be used in our condominiums here in Florida. There is a notice requirement to owners. It's a 48-hour notice requirement to owners, letting them know the board will be voting on a resolution to allow e-voting to be used. All right. Statutory requirement. We can't bypass that. If we're using e-voting for an annual meeting, for amendments, and you're a condominium and you have an e-voting provider, no matter whether it's Get Quorum or someone else, you've got to have that resolution in place. Please make sure, I would implore you, and I might mention this a few times, while we're not attorneys here in the state of Florida, and none of this is legal advice that we'll provide today, we certainly implore you to connect with your association councils just to make sure that the association's on the same page and that the requirements statutorily are being taken care of. So again, connect with your association council, let them know that you're going to be voting on a resolution to allow electronic voting to be using. Give them a heads up that perhaps the next annual meeting or the next special meeting will include an e-voting option, and it should go a long way for you. So, resolution requirement number one, check. Second, here, members must consent to voting electronically. All right. So, very important here that we understand that while the owners or the members do not get a say as to whether the resolution is passed and whether e-voting is offered or not, they do get a say as to whether they want to opt in to e-voting or not. So very important here that we understand that from an owner's perspective, you do get an opportunity to let the association know whether you want to opt in to e-voting or not. That should come by way of a consent being sent out to the owners. It should mostly be electronic, especially these days, but there's still some paper consents out there. No matter which version you're using as an association, you do have to reach out to owners and ask them to opt into electronic voting. If an owner does not opt into electronic voting, they're opted out basically. They have to resource to only paper voting. If there's a consent on file for an owner to opt in or use electronic voting after the resolution has been passed, you're good to go. Owners only have to consent or opt into electronic voting once. They do not have to opt in every single year unless they've opted out or any of their information has changed. For the most part, owners opting in stay opted in perpetuity. For my association managers on the call today, please keep a few of these documents around that are very important. I actually spoke to an attorney earlier this week that let me know that they kind of packaged this up almost into one big file. Your e-voting resolution, somewhere around, that's an official document of the association. Your consent notices for owners, again, another official record of the association, your e-voting consents. Why do I say that? Owners are going to forget they opted into electronic voting. I promise you that. And when they forget whether they opted into e-voting or not, or consented to e-voting, they will call the management office more than likely, or the administrative office, and say, did I opt into e-voting, and do you have that proof? Could you please provide it to me? So keep those consents around. As an e-voting provider, if you've got someone like Get Quorum that can keep those electronic consents in the platform, great. If you don't, again, just make sure you have that as your official record. So let's go to number 3 here. Electronic votes do count towards quorum. That's why we go through all of this work, because e-votes count towards quorum, and an owner is not required to be present at the meeting nor submit a proxy for attendance purposes. So I'm going to walk you through number 3 here. All right. If you are an owner in a condominium building or a member and you casted a vote electronically, not just opted in, opting into e-voting does not provide quorum. I just want to be clear because that question comes up all the time. But if you actually casted an electronic vote towards whatever matter was brought up, whether it was an amendment or your official ballot, if you cast an e-vote, it does count towards quorum. And for the most part, you do not have to provide a proxy for attendance purposes, right? I know that usually by paper vote, we ask if the owner's not going to be there for them to fill out an attendance proxy in the event that they don't show up, and to return that with their secret ballot. That's not the case for e-voting. The electronic secret ballot is the only voting document that would be required to be filled out by an e-voter. Hopefully that's clear enough. If not, put the questions in the Q&A chat there. All right. Now, as number 4 states, the association must comply with the requirements. I still get that question asked. I was just in a demo earlier where the 55 and better community was asking, hey, are you sure we have to even pass this resolution, or can we just jump straight into providing electronic voting in our community? That's not the case, at least not per statute. All right. So there are a few things there, including when e-voting consents close. They close 14 days prior to any meeting that requires a membership vote. All right. So they pause, I want to call it. And then generally speaking, electronic consent is open year round. The exception is 14 days prior to a meeting requiring an owner's vote. That's intentional. We want to make sure owners aren't opting in or out at the very last minute. But for the most part, the e-voting consent is an open process throughout the year. All right. Now, House Bill 913, introduced last year in July, made a few shifts and changes for us. And I'm going to walk you through what those are. And I see we've got a few questions, so do not fear. I'll make sure that we get through some of those. All right, perfect. Our board members eligible for CE credit for this course. We are working on getting the eligibility for you as of today. No, it is just a licensed community association manager, but I promise you'll have very good takeaways. But we're working on getting it kind of dually accredited here, if you will. So bear with me here as I walk you through some of the House Bill 913 updates that rolled out in July. And pay close attention here because they might sound a little confusing, but we've kind of broken the code and made them a little bit simpler for you. Prior to July of last year and House Bill 913 being passed, there was a 14-day requirement for board meeting notice where the resolution was going to be considered. That's no longer the case. So for my managers on the call, for my board members wondering, hey, the notice resolution 48 hours before we vote on a resolution to allow electronic voting, That's not always been the case. It was a 14-day notice requirement. It has since changed to a regular board meeting notice prior to the e-voting resolution being adopted, and again, voted on by board members only. That was a big provision. That was nice. Step in the right direction for sure. Because prior to that, again, it was 14 days. Here's a big one. The second kind of bullet point there we'll walk through. If 25% of the unit owners petition the board to adopt electronic voting within 180 days of the last annual meeting, then the board must hold a meeting within 21 days after receipt of the petition to adopt e-voting. All right. If e-voting is not provided for, then there are new provisions requiring unit owners to have the opportunity to electronically transmit a ballot. We're going to get into that because what this House Bill 913 did is it said, hey, owners, we're going to put a little bit of the power in your hands as to whether you want electronic voting or not. Prior to House Bill 913 being approved and passing, really the board held the cards as it pertains to e-voting in the communities. Fast forward, especially not only to July of last year, but to today, the board, the owners, I should say, or the members have a little bit more say here as to whether e-voting is considered. Now, I will tell you, even if electronic voting is not adopted, it's the resolution isn't passed, owners, especially for the ballot, have an opportunity to email their secret ballot in. All right. So the electronic ballot, so they're basically saying the state here is, hey, board members, if you don't hire a professional company to take care of this service for you, then we're going to make it really challenging and allow the owners that wish to do so to email a secret ballot, thereby waiving the anonymity of the vote. Just to be clear, it doesn't stay a secret ballot if they email the vote to a designated email address. So it's either or. I just want to make sure that for those on the call today, they understand that this provision says it's either or, it's not both. So either you have a professional electronic voting provider authenticating owners, making sure they vet the information and that they transmit secure ballots to owners. So either you hire somebody to do that, or the state has said here, hey, we'll allow owners to basically randomly submit secret ballots to the association vis-a-vis an email. And then, of course, they waive their anonymity. Now, remember, the association is going to have to figure out whether that's the actual owner sending that ballot, right? Where that email is coming from, whether it's a valid email connected to an owner. So it's a bit messy. Even some of the association attorneys I've spoken to aren't entirely sure how that provision makes sense, in that there's a ton of work that e-voting providers like us put in on the back end to making sure that there are authenticated owners that are casting votes. And what they're basically saying there is, we're not really sure if they're going to be authenticated. It's up to the association to authenticate them. So that's what that kind of second bullet point says there. Very challenging, extremely complex. And again, something that I wouldn't wish, especially on my larger condominium associations, to have to do. We'll move on to the third point here. The House Bill 913 said, hey, official records now include electronic records, bank statements, and recordings. Big one. That's a big one here. But recordings that are conducted by video conference, right? If you are using video conferencing, and most of our associations are, there's only so much time that's going to pass before we all basically have to use some sort of virtual or video conferencing. The state came down and said, hey, those have to be recorded and make them available to other owners. Please make sure that they have access to them. All right. Video conference is now a term that they added in. Why did they do that? A lot of the association docs are very old, right? Most of them do not speak to video conferencing. So they kind of made things easy there where you do not have to amend your association docs. All right. If a unit owner's membership meeting is held electronically, then, oops, sorry about that. Then the requirements are followed, then unit owners may vote electronically. All right. So again, it's either or. Either you have a professional e-voting provider and they can take care of a lot of this work for you, or you're kind of on your own. Summary continued here, just kind of wrapping up the 913 summary, because again, it was a lot. If an annual membership meeting is electronic, if you're going to have a virtual option for an annual membership meeting, a quorum of the board must be physically present at the location. I've got no idea why. that was implemented, but certainly it was. And so for now, that's the case. So if you serve on a board and you've got an annual meeting coming up, and it's going to be a hybrid meeting for the most part, right? And it's going to offer a virtual option. A quorum of the board must be physically present. So make sure that you're privy to that and that you understand that while you might be a board member tuning in by Zoom or other virtual components, that you have to make sure that the quorum of the board is physically there for your annual meeting, all right, and present at least at the location. Again, the meetings have to be recorded, and we've got designated email addresses now for associations that don't have an official e-voting provider in place, which waives the secrecy of that ballot. We kind of went through that, but I just want to make sure that if there's questions about that, that we can handle them. Let me see if we've got anything directly to this. Yes. Are these requirements the same for co-ops in Chapter 719 statutes? Not that I'm aware of. This was specific to our 718s, our condos. What we expect is the following. We expect for the language that you see here in House Bill 913 to be extended not only to co-ops, but we do expect in the very near future the same language to be adopted for our HOAs as well, right? That at some point the HOA world begins to align with some of these condominium processes as well. Let's get into some of the elections ins and outs. All right. And again, we'll walk through this. We'll make sure you have a good understanding into the elections, the timelines, the eligibility, the ballots. We're going to cover a lot here. It's okay if you don't remember everything. We'll share this presentation, we'll share this recording. Do not worry. There's a lot. And again, for those on the call, especially board members, perhaps homeowners, members of these associations, lean on your subject matter experts for these sections I'm about to embark on. Do not try to take all of this on your own. You have your very seasoned attorneys out there. You have your very seasoned property managers as well, which have probably conducted many of these elections. And then in many cases, you have the choices to use folks like election monitors, worth their weight in gold here in the state of Florida because they're an independent third party, just like a quorum is, and they can oversee this entire process for you. So let's get into some of this stuff. Meeting notices. Let's start from the top here. You've got to make sure you get your meeting notices out as it pertains to your elections and your annual meeting notices. This could be a fatal flaw, excuse me. This could be a fatal flaw. So if you don't start the process right, it certainly isn't going to end very well. The process is the following. Generally speaking, about 90 days prior, you're getting your notice of voting rights suspension. You're making sure you reach out to owners that perhaps are in arrears, and you're buttoning that up. You definitely do not wait, right, till the day of the election or just before to say, hey, you're in arrears. Congratulations, you can't vote in this community. You got to button those steps up much prior to those notices going out on the day of voting. I think the state has taken exception with associations that have kind of shocked owners at the last minute saying, hey, you got a ballot, you got all of your documents, we're throwing out your vote, you're in arrears. So they've made a point in making sure that that information is communicated much in advance. And again, things that you should be checking in with your association attorney and your manager as well, right? For the community. 60 days prior, your first notice of elections generally going out at that point. You're sending out what we call in the condominium world your first notice of the annual meeting. That first notice, as we all know, generally contains notice of intent in it, the meeting date, the proposed meeting date, and an agenda. So make sure, again, those things are buttoned up. Each of these individual steps should be buttoned up with no exception, right? You should be consulting your association counsel to make sure these notices are correct in nature. Do not just make this stuff up. 40 days prior to the day of the election and the annual meeting, the notice of intents for candidates should be received. So it's kind of a cutoff there, and this is nice. It's pretty clean process as you follow the timeline. 35 days prior, candidate information sheets should have been received no later than that. And then here's a little bit of a window. We're going to call this a window because condominiums, depending on their docs, have a little bit of leeway here. And what the statute says is, hey, if your associations are kind of mum on this, you should be sending out your second notice with your ballot no less than 14 days out. For the most part, there's a lot of condominiums out there that do have language that say things like, we'll send out our second notice at 30 days, right? But you cannot send it out any more than 34 days and no less than 14. Refer to your association docs. If it is silent, make sure you are sending out your second notice no less than 14 days out. If you send out your second notice inside of those 14 days, everything will pretty much be hijacked. I can tell you that. So make sure that you post a copy of the second notice and make sure that, again, you've received an affidavit of mailing, not just by physical mailing, but if you're using someone like a quorum to send out electronic ballot notices, please make sure that you're receiving an electronic affidavit of mailing. All right. So I'll repeat that again. If you are sending out electronic second notices because an owner has opted into electronic notices, you are not required to send that owner a paper notice. If the owner has opted in to an electronic notice, you can send out your first notice and your second notice purely electronically. You do not have to send out. Make sure you have a consent on file where an owner has opted into electronic notices to be sent to them, and then you can save some money on printing there. But again, the caveat there is make sure you have an affidavit, make sure you have proof that you've sent these notices electronically to that owner because the owners will call and they'll say, hey, I never received my notice or notices. And the burden of proof is really on the association to make sure that they can prove that this notice was electronically sent to that owner. All right. So make sure that you're kind of following that timeline electronically and by paper. They should kind of be working together side by side. I've got a little gift for you here for those on the call today. Quorum has come up with a Florida meetings deadline calculator. It's going to make the process of calculating or counting backwards your notice due dates for you. So it'll kind of count backwards. If you enter a annual meeting date, it'll count it backwards for you. Here's a QR code. I'll give everybody a moment here if you wish to scan it or take a screenshot of this if you want to. And it should help to alleviate you having to count backwards, especially for those managers on the call today. They love this tool and they usually use it. Again, inputting a meeting date, counting notices backwards for you. So wait just another moment there. We used to have this in kind of a big wheel and paper wheel, and now it's a digital process for you. So again, we'll make this available. So don't worry, this recording for the most part. Eligibility of the candidates. None of this changes with electronic voting. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. None of these steps that I'm walking through completely change or get hijacked by e-voting. In its purest, simplest form, e-voting should be creating a digital carbon copy of most of these processes, right? So eligibility of candidates, again, make sure you've got your eligibility requirements buttoned up to make sure that as you start receiving those notice of intents, you vet them like you normally would, right? There's a few reasons why an owner would be eligible and not eligible. They're there on the screen. I won't get too much into this, but for the most part, again, this should be very straightforward. It should be on that notice, even if you ask me, in terms of letting the owners know that wish to provide their candidacy, what an eligible owner looks like and what an ineligible owner looks like. It shouldn't be a shock. They shouldn't be sending in their intent to run and then being replied back with, hey, you're not eligible because you have condo assessments that have been owed for 2 years. That shouldn't be a surprise. You know what? Include some of that language out there. Make it very well known that eligibility is important. Let's move on to ballots. Some of this is going to describe your paper ballots, electronically speaking. Clearly, this won't apply because it's more of a digital link out there. But make sure on the paper side, they're uniform in color. For paper or electronic ballots, you've got to make sure that the candidates are listed in alphabetical order by surname. There shouldn't be any indicators for incumbents. Again, whether it's a paper or electronic ballot out there being sent to your e-voters, I'll call it the pool of e-voters. There shouldn't be anything that indicates, current president, past president, super duper vice president. While there certainly can be bios attached, if it's a paper ballot, they're kind of included in there. If it is a electronic ballot, there's usually a link to all of the bios. While there's certainly bio options to read through the qualifications of the candidates, there shouldn't be a ton of indicators, right, and fireworks for any one or another candidate, and even no unit identification. All right. The conduction of the election. All right, on our condo elections here, it is a secret ballot. Ladies and gentlemen, folks on the call today, none of this changes because we're voting electronically or by paper. This is one of the most frequent questions we get. I got it this week already. It's at least once a week. I'm sure I'll get it again. It's only Tuesday. And I get asked the question over and over again. Hey, get Corma, we use electronic voting. Can an owner then revoke their secret ballot vote, right? Now we're speaking specifically to a secret ballot. Can they revoke it if they change their mind and then just resubmit the secret ballot? That's a full stop no on the electronic ballot world. It should behave just as your paper ballot behaves. So if you have a paper secret ballot that is non-revocable, and that's how our condominium world works, then electronically speaking, it should behave the same way. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody on the call. Voting by proxy is not allowed, again, for elections here we're discussing, right? We'll put things like amendments aside and special meetings aside. But for the most part, voting by proxy for elections is not allowed. It's also not allowed electronically, right? Just because we're using an electronic provider, e-voting, you cannot vote for candidates with a proxy and give your vote over to someone else. It would still be an electronic secret ballot, right? So you're either getting an electronic paper ballot if you're an owner that never opted in, or you're getting a paper ballot, or you're getting an electronic ballot. One or the other. You shouldn't be getting both, by the way, paper or electronic. For my condominiums on the call today that require voting certificates, that doesn't go away in the world of electronic voting. Make sure you check your association's governing docs and make sure you're on the same page internally first in collecting those voting certificates, but then externally when you're hiring an electronic voting provider, get them that information. Get your e-voting provider your voting certificates, designated voters information. Let them know who's eligible to vote if you require voting certificates. Voting certificates right now kind of run the gamut on which units need one. I have condo buildings that in their association docs say, hey, every door has to have one, right? Every door has one, or they can't vote. Even if it's a single owner, it doesn't matter. They still have to fill one out. If that's the case, get that information to your e-voting provider to make sure they restrict voting to only that voting certificate holder. Generally speaking, what we see in the voting certificate world, it's that they're limited to corporations, right? Non-for-profits, trusts, that sort of thing. There's a voting certificate required for, and multiple owners, right? So, 3, 4 owners that are not necessarily a husband and wife. We see a lot of exceptions out there. Single owner units, husband and wife units generally do not need a voting certificate. If that's the case, again, make sure you are communicating that information with your e-voting provider so that they are in a good position prior to the ballot going out. Worst case scenario, you don't say anything at all. You send out ballots to everyone, and then the day of the meeting, you start communicating the fact that only the voting certificate holder is a valid vote. It's going to be a very challenging day, I promise you, if at the very last minute you're telling your e-voting provider that they have to extract votes and only the voting certificate providers or holders can vote. We've got a different school of thought. What we're thinking is, get us that information in advance. Let us send out ballots only to the voting certificate holders, and allow us to allow the owners that cast a vote to only be your voting certificate holders. That's a thing. E-voting companies can restrict voting to only voting certificate holders. Let's get ahead of that. If you can help us as an association, it's really going to help your day of the meeting. All right. Now, this doesn't go away. You should have some additional blank ballots in and out envelopes available at the election. I will give you some cases there. There might be an owner walking in saying, hey, listen, my email was compromised. I did not vote electronically. Please check your system as I check into the meeting. Allow me to vote by paper, assuming that voting is still open and they still have an opportunity to vote. They might have a good reason why they show up and vote. You might have non-electronic voters show up the day of the meeting. So make sure you've got some of those. Now, remember, there's some exceptions to elections. They might not be required if the number of vacancies equals the number of candidates or less. And remember that these meetings must occur at duly noticed owners meetings. I'm going to get some questions here. That was a lot. Hopefully it made sense as we kind of took that journey there together. Perfect, perfect. Let's see here. I've got a question here that says when utilizing an online provider for the annual meeting, what can one do if the provider sends the notices late, even if a deadline no later than 9 a.m. was provided? Well, my recommendation here, and thank you for the question, is just to walk through expectations with the e-voting provider if they're sending out notices and ask for an electronic affidavit of mailing. What is that? Again, the idea is that you are being provided evidence that your notice was sent in time, on the correct time, correct dates, if not before. That is your proof. Just like your post office affidavit of mailing is one as well, saying, yep, we took everything to the post office on time and paper wise, we sent it out. You should have an electronic affidavit of mailing that should be provided by your e-voting provider. If they're unable to provide that, then ask yourself if that's a vendor that you want to engage with. If by chance that vendor does send out your notice late, check in with your association attorney, see how late, see how it affected the mailing, whether it was minutes, hours, how it was affected, and let them have the final say and the final decision as to whether they feel that that's a fatal flaw and whether they feel like that necessitates the resending, of a first and second notice, right? Fatal flaw, if it's really bad and egregious, and you have no proof of sending the notices on time, you may have to reset the process, right? That's a fatal flaw. That would be the worst case scenario. Best case scenario, there might be some leeway. I'll give you an example. An e-voting provider might be asked to send a notice out at the 21-day mark or 25-day mark. And for some reason or another, they might not send it out until the 18th day mark. If you have a 14-day minimum that you've got to send that notice out, you're still complying and in compliance. So you're still good, right? So again, that's why I tell you, check in with your procedures, with your also association attorney if you need to, and make sure that you've all reviewed all of the data before making a final decision as to whether you have to reset the process of the mailers. So good question. Thank you. I've got another question here. How do you deal with new owners that acquire ownership after the 60-day notice was sent? And thank you for that, Joe. If an owner has acquired or purchased in the community after, we'll call it the first notice, after the first notice was sent, there's a few avenues here. They still have an opportunity to opt into electronic voting for what would be the second notice and cast an e-vote. They're outside of that 14-day window still, right? So they can still opt into e-voting for a second notice and for their e-vote. My recommendation would be to make sure that you send that owner a notice, a 60-day notice by paper means if they've not opted into electronic voting right away as quickly as possible. Clearly, they just purchased a unit, so they should receive that information. In addition to that, if they never opt into electronic voting inside of the second notice, clearly they're going to be sent a second notice by paper and they're going to have an option of voting by paper. If they are within the time frame or the window of opting in to e-voting and e-notices, send them the second notice. Try to get them to opt in or consent prior to the second notice. Make sure that you can still get them as an e-voter if they wish to do that. If they don't, again, they'll stay as a paper voter. But I would recommend, as a best practice, sending them a 60-day notice, even if they purchased, or a 60-day or 90-day notice, even if they purchased inside of that date. Okay. All right. Thank you for that question. We've got another one here. Can an electronic proxy be bypassed when an electronic ballot is submitted, but the voter wishes to attend the meeting in person? So that was a lot there. So an e-voter doesn't usually provide an e-proxy. They only provide the ballots. So if they submitted an electronic ballot and it's a secret ballot and they wish to attend the meeting in person, they can. They just can't double vote now. Their vote has already been submitted, but they're welcome to attend the meeting and listen in to the entire meeting. Their electronic secret ballot will stay on file. They cannot revoke that, right? Now, I'm going to take things kind of a little bit of a side conversation here for just a moment. If it is a proxy for amendments, for example, right, for other votes other than a ballot, a secret ballot, and an owner submitting a limited proxy, for example, for votes other than a limited or other than a secret ballot, and they show up to the meeting and they say, "Hey, I want to revoke my limited proxy vote on the amendment that we're voting on or the other measures we're voting on that are not secret ballot. I want to revoke that electronically and I want to vote here live and in person." In that case, that would be a yes. They could do that. For e-voters, if they already submitted a secret ballot, then that's a no for elections, right? So if it's for an election, it's final. If it's for anything other than election, they can revoke the ballot and vote at the meeting. If there's an e-voter that has never submitted an e-vote and they show up to the meeting, clearly they should have the opportunity to vote, assuming that the voting is still open. So there's a lot of scenarios there. Make sure you review these prior to the meeting. Review these scenarios with your e-voting provider. They shouldn't be a secret. They shouldn't be a shock the day of the meeting. You should have already prepared for these different scenarios prior to the meeting. So thank you for that. That was a very good question. Keep them coming. I think we've got those answered. So I'll let Mark those off because I think for the most part we're good there. Keep those questions coming and we'll keep on here. All right. Now remember your quorum requirements. And I'm going to say something that you've already heard in today's conversation. Your quorum requirement as it pertains to your election or your amendments, if you're running amendments and things of that nature, those quorum requirements do not change because you're using e-voting. I just want to make sure, again, it's well established here that your quorum requirements are your quorum requirements. Whether you're getting e-votes, whether you're not getting e-votes, those are kind of inked in stone, if you will, or etched in stone. What we're looking at for condos is, generally speaking, at least 20% of the eligible voters casting a ballot in order for the election to be valid, right? So that's electronically speaking. The proxies do work as well, so they can cast just an attendance proxy, we call it, not a ballot proxy, but an attendance proxy. And if you get enough of that, those proxies in, you should be in good shape. Now, keep in mind, in the world of electronic voting, you can have a combination of electronic ballots and paper ballots. And as long as they're not double votes, assuming they're just one vote per unit, both of those are merged. Both of those count, right? So you have one unit that submitted a paper ballot, another unit that submitted an electronic ballot. That's great. You're adding two, right? This is kind of a combination of those two. So again, check your governing docs for your official percentages. I know that for things like amendments, generally speaking, it's 66 and 2/3 or a majority of the voting interest, which could be 50% plus one. Those are questions that you want to make sure you have ironed out well ahead of any official voting documents going out. So you want to have that conversation with your association attorney, with your management, and make sure that you're well aware of what your percentages are in order to reach quorum. And then you relay that information over to your e-voting provider. Don't keep it a secret. E-voting providers want to know what your quorum requirements are to make sure that they can calculate that for you as far as e-votes are concerned. All right. So again, make sure that you're walking through some best practices here. Make sure that all voting as it pertains to your ballots the day of the meeting are counted in the following fashion. Close the polls. Close all polls, e-voting, right? Electronically speaking, and paper polls. Once all polls are closed, and our recommendation is that the polls are closed simultaneously. There shouldn't be a penalty for e-voters. I've heard a lot of rumors out there. Well, we're going to close e-voting a day before, 2 days before, and then we're going to close paper voting the day of. Well, that's kind of a penalty for e-voters. They should have the opportunity to vote as long as paper voters do. So close your voting, whatever that looks like, and do not open up those outer paper envelopes just yet. Make sure that you have a list of your e-voters prior to breaching those outer envelopes. Have a list of the electronic voters provided to the counting committee or to an election monitor if they're the ones that are going to be counting the paper. Make sure they have that list in front of them because this is going to be your safety net. It's going to help you avoid double voting. How are we going to avoid double voting? We are going to make sure that you have a list of electronic voters in front of the counting committee that's about to open up paper. None of the e-voters' names should come up in those outer envelopes. Those outer envelopes say the name of the voting owner, the unit usually, and they should not duplicate. There shouldn't be a duplicate there. As far as which vote is counted, I'm going to revert you back to your association attorney because there's a lot of schools of thought. Generally speaking, one vote should be counted if you ask us. I know there's some associations saying no vote is counted, there's a double vote. And generally speaking, it usually is that first vote in. Electronically speaking, if they opted into e-voting, we certainly are of the belief that the e-vote should be the one that takes precedent. But the hope is here that you are not providing an opportunity for an owner to vote twice. If you can avoid providing an opportunity for an owner to vote twice, you're going to be in very good shape. If you're sending out paper ballots to owners that have an e-ballot, you're going to get a double vote, folks. I promise you. Try to mitigate that by sending out either an electronic ballot or a paper ballot. It's one or the other. They should not be receiving both, and that's going to help you mitigate a lot. If for some reason something fell through the cracks, when you close the polls, get the list of the electronic voters in front of the counting committee. Make sure that they have looked at the outer envelopes and that none of those names show up under the electronic voters list, because that way you can, again, mitigate a double vote. So that should be best practice there as far as the double votes. Here's my slide on election monitors. And again, I know I said this earlier. So the associations can hire an independent election monitor to conduct the elections. It can come by several ways: 15% of the total voting interests or 6 unit owners, whichever is greater, usually is 15%. If they petition the DBPR office in the condominium of the ombudsman to appoint an election monitor, they will. It costs money, folks. It's not a free service, just to be clear on the call today. It could range, so I don't want to give specific prices. Election monitors, for the most part, have the pricing, touch base with them. It is worth it. Whatever they charge, it is worth it because these are independent monitors, boots on the ground, physically there the day of the meeting. In an ideal world, I will tell you that what the absolute perfect scenario, if you ask me, would look like, it's an independent election monitor, boots on the ground that day, an e-voting provider taking care of electronic votes, and there's a paper voting option, certainly. And all of these worlds are colliding and providing the final reports to the election monitor, which is vetting the e-votes, vetting the paper votes, and making sure that the processes and the notices have been sent out on time. So in an absolute perfect scenario, all of these tools are being used all together. It's not one or the other. It's all the tools. And so another way an election monitor can be hired is outside of the 15% of the total voting interest. An association can decide to hire them, without 15% of the voting interest, filling out a petition. I know many condos and HOAs that decided that it would be in their best interest that year to hire an election monitor, even without this petition being filled out. Just perhaps because they wanted to make sure that it was an independent process and that there was no pushback from owners, and they have. And I've not heard of a single case that there's been any major issues. So I would encourage you to, if you need it for your association, try to touch base and hire an election monitor out there. And if there's any HOAs on the call today, same goes for you. Election monitors for my 719s, 18s today, and 720s. All right, virtual meetings. We're still holding a lot of those. So I'm going to fold in, and I have one or two other questions here. So thank you. Keep those coming. I'm going to fold in as we wrap up here. I'm going to fold in some of these virtual meetings and how they affect electronic voting. Virtual meetings are here to stay, in case you guys haven't noticed, and I think they're going to get more and more frequent. If you're having a hybrid meeting, meaning there's an in-person option for owners and a virtual option for owners to attend your election or your annual meeting, fine, keep that going. Make sure you record that meeting, obviously, and make sure that your manager, your association attorney, and your e-voting provider understand that there is going to be kind of a virtual option. Make sure you have a dress rehearsal. Make sure everything's working in the room prior to the meeting, right? Do not leave this all to the last moment. Please make sure you have the right equipment, such as your external projector, external microphone, external camera, and external speaker, right? So microphone, camera, speaker, very inexpensive things if you're going to purchase them on your own in places like Amazon or Office Depot or wherever it is. If you need it, if your requirements are beyond that, think of using a local AV provider, right, to just kind of wire the room. Why are we using these virtual meetings? We know in many cases you don't have a room big enough to house all the owners. It's a cost reduction if you have a virtual meeting versus a massive meeting space that you had to rent, and it does improve the efficiency and meeting time as well. So I'll leave that there again. Make sure that you rehearse a lot of that virtual meeting stuff. Try to use webinar technology instead of a just generic meeting link. If you can use webinar technology, it's a meeting link per email. I think it's going to go a long way there in creating a more secure environment. All right, so just to recap this stuff. All right, board must adopt a resolution for e-voting. It still must allow owners to vote by paper. That doesn't go away. We have some owners with heartburn saying, well, if my board adopts a resolution, then I have to vote electronically. That's not the case. It doesn't go away. You can still vote by paper. If you want to opt out of e-voting or stay opted out of e-voting, you can still use paper. All right. Getting owners to consent, recap that. Making sure unit owners have been authenticated, the identity. Your e-voting provider should be taking care of that. All right. Transmission of an electronic ballot, so secret transmission, make sure it's secret, and then confirming that the system's working 14 days in advance. So all of that stuff, nothing changes. Listen, there's always challenges to adopting new things. So please make sure that you have all the best practices that I've mentioned in today's call. I will tell you that any election challenges, right, to the results must commence within 60 days after the election, and any vacancies can be filled by votes of the majority of the directors. So the board usually fills vacancies beyond the election time period. All right. So I'm gonna leave you with a few things here, and again, I'll tackle any questions as we wrap up here. Consider the challenges. Please over communicate all these steps I've mentioned today. None of this should be kept in a silo. It should be over communicated with owners, how e-voting is going to be available, over communicated with management, and over communicated with association council and election monitor if you're using one. Everyone should be on the same page. Make sure you hire an electronic voting provider if you don't have one already that fully supports these steps that we mentioned today. There's a lot of fully managed e-voting providers, such as Get Quorum, and there's self-managed. I know that I was on a call earlier today. They were discussing platforms where they would do all of this on their own. They would create ballots, they would program things. I certainly would encourage them to seek a fully managed solution, whoever that is, versus self-managed e-voting out there. Take into account the attendee experience, how it changes, the e-voting, the fact that you're going to obviously have those automated e-votes. Communicate that, make sure you have the correct reporting and security in place. All right. So, for the most part, walk through these technical issues, make sure that you understand that there could be challenges, make sure equipment's working, Wi Fi signals are strong, and make sure that you've tested these systems out. I know in many communities that were hired, they first cast an amendment vote and then they go to things like the election, right? So if that's a possibility, absolutely do it. So adapt for these procedures. Ensure you have an ample amount of support out there. Please make sure that you're supported in every single step. Make sure you've got a plan in place. And please make sure you have a secure platform that covers your individual needs. Walk through the needs of the association, walk through the annual meeting, what that looks like, and make sure that plan is in place with your e-voting provider. I'll leave you with a few last best practices, and I know some of them we've already spoken about. Establish ground rules. Make sure you're consulting your legal counsel. Account for your pre-existing bylaws. Communicate with your owners. Choose the right platform. You're going to be in a lot of pain if you do not choose the right platform. You're going to be in pain because if it is a platform that's unable to tackle some of these challenges for you, it might hijack the whole process. The meeting format might change a little bit, especially if you're doing a hybrid meeting, and make sure you have plenty of technical support and everyone prepared. All right. Here's what we expect from for the most part. the electronic voting is here to stay. It's going to continue to catch on fire and make things easier for managers and voters alike. In terms of the board members, if you've been newly confirmed in and you were elected, congratulations. Make sure you go through your continuing education, seminar that you are in need of. Certify in writing that you've read through the governing docs, and there are some shifts and changes there. There's a lot of continuing education that we continue to see. So connect with your association manager and make sure you're all on the same page. All right. Congrats in terms of the course here. You've completed it. For my continuing education courses, if you are in need of a certificate, you can scan that QR code. Hopefully, you like the little dinosaur there in the middle. I'll see if I have any questions here that we can get to, but you can, again, scan the QR code on the screen there, and you'll be provided an opportunity to get a course completion certificate. All right, and I'm gonna see if we've got any questions here. Um, and I'm gonna answer a question and leave this on the screen for just a moment here. And thank you for the question, Lucy. It says, I've had the questions from members who are e-voting as to why they vote before the meeting. Voting was closed the day before the meeting. How do we give information on questions they are voting on before the meeting? So I'm just walking through here. It says e-voting, why they vote before the meeting. All right. So why do e-voters vote before the meeting? E-voters should only be voting before the meeting if paper voters can vote before the meeting. It should align. Those processes should align. I'll give you an example. If an e-voter is filling out for our condos a ballot prior to the meeting, you should also be mailing physical ballots before the meeting. So whether you're a paper ballot voter or you're an e-voter, prior to the election, you can fill out your vote and submit it, right? Doesn't matter whether you're a paper ballot or e-voter. Same thing with a proxy. If you're tackling amendments in your communities and some of those other steps, and you're sending out a limited proxy for an amendment change, generally speaking, whether you put it in the mail or whether you send it electronically, those votes can be sent back prior to the meeting. So whether you're an e-voter or an electronic voter, you should be able to vote in advance of these meetings. There are owners that choose not to do that, that choose to walk in the day of the meeting and vote at the meeting. Again, that was a choice they made. That wasn't mandatory. If a paper voter decided to throw away their paper ballot that you mailed them and show up at the meeting and vote, that's their prerogative. But I just want to be very clear in saying that paper voters do have the opportunity to vote before the meeting, and e-voters have the same opportunity to vote before the meeting as well. So it's kind of, again, it should be a carbon copy of that process, no matter who you are. So that's hopefully explains that. Now, again, if you're an association in today's call and you're closing the voting prior to the meeting for e-voters, you're doing them a disservice because you're handicapping the fact that they might need an extra day to vote. So consider opening electronic voting until the day of the meeting. E-voting gives immediate results, so don't panic. You can close e-voting at right at the beginning of the meeting, and you can receive immediate results right away from electronic voting. So it is immediate. You do not have to panic and close e-voting the day before or many days before. That should be the day of. Course evaluation, the state requires for us to send out a course evaluation form. If you liked the course today, fill it out. If you hated it, hopefully you didn't, but if you didn't love it, fill it out as well. Give us some feedback and let us know what we can improve on. I think that that's always important there as well. So I'll leave that up for a moment and I'll check questions again here. All right. Course certificate. Perfect. Oh, you can fill in the course certificate. You can fill that in, but we will be providing the licensed community association managers will be providing you with your credit hour. Don't worry, and that should go in at some point this week, if not latest by next week. So you'll see it soon. Um, all right. I see that there might be a question from Mary. Mary, can you put that in the Q&A chat or in the chat? So Q&A or chat, and we can perhaps answer that question. Hopefully we can get that. We got the Q&A still open for another minute here. Mary, if you want to ask a question. All right. So I see here a question from Joe. Why wouldn't you close electronic voting and mail-in ballots 1 hour prior to the meeting? You could. Absolutely. My feedback on that would be make sure that you're following precedent for your community. If you're a condo that has for years closed paper and electronic voting 1 hour prior to the meeting, then I think you're well within your rights. If you are a condo that has always closed paper voting right after the meeting begins, then don't close e-voting the day before because again that's very inconsistent, right? So whatever process you followed, whatever consistency you've had, please make sure you continue to follow that. And again, when you have if you have any questions on that, check in with association counsel just to make sure they're on the same page. I believe that was our last question, but I want to thank everybody, provide you my contact information. I think we've answered all of the questions out there. And if we have not, our contact info is there. So you're welcome to send the questions in. We stuck the landing here. It is 2 o'clock on the dot. I want to thank everybody again for giving us some time today and let you know that if you need some individual conversations, we're here to help. You can reach out directly to us and perhaps we can have a little bit deeper conversation into your individual communities. So thank you. Wishing everybody a great rest of your day and week and appreciate you joining us today.